Elliot Brandt, a tech billionaire and devoted single father, brings his 6-year-old nonverbal autistic son Luca to a secluded mountain resort, desperately hoping the peace will somehow reach the child who hasn't spoken in 3 years. Nova James, a quiet maid with her own painful past, tends the resort's garden with gentle hands and a broken heart, carrying the memory of her late autistic brother in every flower she plants. When Luca is mysteriously drawn to Nova's silent presence, something miraculous begins to unfold, a connection that transcends words and touches the deepest places of the human heart. As Nova's patient understanding helps Luca find his voice again, she and Elliot discover that sometimes the most profound love stories are written not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of acceptance and hope. Before we start this story, comment below from where you are watching us. The mountain air felt crisp as Elliot Brandt stepped out of his black luxury SUV and took a deep breath. At 34, he looked older. The dark circles under his eyes and the permanent worry lines on his forehead were evidence of the weight he carried. He was dressed in expensive, casual clothes that still somehow looked formal on him. "We're here, buddy," he said softly, opening the back door where 6-year-old Luca sat perfectly still, staring out the window. Luca didn't respond. He hadn't spoken a word in 3 years. A bellhop approached with a cart. "Welcome to Pine Ridge Resort, sir. May I take your bags?" "Thank you," Elliot said, handing him a generous tip. "These 2 large suitcases and that blue backpack. The dinosaur bag stays with my son." Luca clutched his dinosaur backpack tightly as Elliot helped him out of the car. The boy had dark curly hair and his father's green eyes, but where Elliot's gaze was intense and searching, Luca's was distant, focused on something no one else could see. They walked into the grand lobby with its soaring ceilings and massive stone fireplace. Elliot kept a protective hand on Luca's shoulder, guiding him through the space while maintaining the buffer of personal space his son needed. At the front desk, a cheerful young woman greeted them. "Welcome to Pine Ridge Resort, Mr. Brandt. We're so excited to have you and your son with us this week." Elliot forced a tired smile. "Thank you. I requested the most private suite you have available." "Of course. The Eagle's Nest Suite. It has its own private entrance and a wonderful view of the mountains. You'll have complete privacy." "Perfect." As they spoke, Luca wandered a few steps away, fixated on the pattern in the lobby's carpet. He began to trace it with his foot, following the same line over and over. Elliot kept one eye on his son while handling the check-in. This was their routine, Elliot managing the world while making sure Luca was safe, comfortable, and not overwhelmed. "Your suite is ready now," the receptionist said, handing over 2 key cards. "Thomas will show you up." As they followed the bellhop to the elevator, they passed a woman in a grey uniform pushing a housekeeping cart. She was tall and slender, with her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Though she kept her eyes downcast, there was something striking about her presence, a quiet dignity in the way she moved. In the elevator, Luca began to rock slightly, his small hands flapping at his sides. "It's okay, buddy," Elliot whispered, kneeling down. "Almost there, almost quiet." The bellhop pretended not to notice, but the housekeeper, who had entered the elevator with them, gave Luca a gentle smile, not looking directly at him, but letting her warmth reach him sideways, without expectation. When the elevator dinged at their floor, Luca's rocking intensified. "This way, sir," the bellhop said, leading them down a carpeted hallway. The housekeeper exited too, pushing her cart in the opposite direction. As she turned the corner, she glanced back once at the father and son. Her name tag read Nova. In their suite, Elliot unpacked while Luca sat by the window, lining up small toy cars in a perfect row. The room was spacious and luxurious, with a separate bedroom for Luca and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the pine forest and mountains beyond. Elliot's phone rang. The screen displayed, "Dr. Hoffman." He answered immediately. "Hello, Doctor. Mr. Brandt, I'm calling to check how Luca is settling in after the change in routine. Travel can be difficult for children with his condition." Elliot moved to the balcony and closed the door behind him. "He's doing all right. Some rocking in the elevator, but no meltdowns so far." "Good, good. And did you bring all his comfort items, the weighted blanket, the noise-cancelling headphones?" "Yes, all of it. I've got a checklist." "Excellent." There was a pause. "Have you considered what we discussed at our last appointment, about adjusting your expectations?" Elliot's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Doctor, I'm not giving up on my son." "It's not about giving up, Mr. Brandt. It's about acceptance. Luca may never—" "I know what the statistics say," Elliot cut in. I know what the brain scans show, but I also know my son is in there, and I will do whatever it takes to reach him. Dr. Hoffman sighed. I understand. Just remember that progress might not look the way you expect it to. Try to enjoy your vacation. Luca responds to your stress levels. I know, Elliot said, softer now. That's why we're here. Peace and quiet. After ending the call, Elliot stood on the balcony for a long moment, staring at the mountains. His eyes burned with unshed tears that he refused to let fall. Tech genius Elliot Brandt had built a fortune solving impossible problems, but he couldn't solve the one that mattered most, reaching his own son. When he came back inside, Luca had lined up 20 cars in perfect color order. Hey buddy, want to go explore? Elliot asked, knowing there would be no answer. There's a garden I think you might like. Nova James moved quietly through the hallways of Pine Ridge Resort, her gray uniform blending into the background. At 28, she had worked at the resort for 5 years, becoming part of the infrastructure, essential but invisible to most guests. In the staff break room, she sat alone, eating a sandwich she'd brought from home. Nova, called Diane, the head of housekeeping. There you are. How are your floors today? All good, Nova replied softly. Rooms 301 through 315 are done. Just finished the platinum floor too. Diane sat down across from her. You okay? You're quieter than usual, and that's saying something. Nova smiled. I'm fine, just thinking. About your brother's birthday coming up? Nova nodded. Her younger brother Michael had been gone for 10 years now, but his birthday still felt sacred to her. He'd been autistic and nonverbal, just like the little boy she'd seen in the elevator earlier. I saw a child today, Nova said. He reminded me of Michael. Diane patted her hand. You have the biggest heart, Nova. That's why even the grumpiest guests never complain about your service. Nova finished her lunch and stood up. I should get back to work. The garden needs tending. The garden behind the resort was Nova's special responsibility. Not officially, she was just a maid, but the head gardener had noticed years ago how the plants seemed to thrive under her care. Now, he let her spend 1 hour each afternoon tending to the flowers and arranging the stones along the pathways. For Nova, the garden was a sanctuary. Among the flowers and butterflies, she felt her brother's presence most strongly. As she knelt by a bed of yellow daisies, carefully removing weeds, she heard voices approaching along the stone path. Look, Luca, aren't these flowers beautiful? It was the man from the elevator, leading his silent son by the hand. Nova kept her head down, continuing her work. From the corner of her eye, she watched as the boy pulled away from his father and walked to a stone bench. He sat down and began picking up fallen leaves, examining each one carefully before placing it in a perfect line on the bench beside him. The father, Elliot, she remembered from the check-in, sat down a little distance from his son, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion, and something deeper, something that looked like heartbreak. Nova recognized that look. She'd seen it on her parents' faces countless times growing up. She stood up quietly, brushed off her uniform, and walked to a linen closet hidden discreetly in the garden wall. She took out a small, folded yellow towel, the softest in the resort's collection. On an impulse, she plucked a perfect yellow daisy and placed it on top of the towel. Moving silently, she approached the bench and placed the folded towel with the flower at the far end, away from both the boy and his father. She didn't speak or make eye contact with either of them. Then she returned to her gardening, kneeling among the flowers as if she'd never moved at all. Elliot noticed her action but said nothing, watching carefully as Luca continued lining up leaves, seemingly unaware of the offering left nearby. After a few minutes, Nova gathered her gardening tools and left the garden as quietly as she had tended it. That evening, Elliot sat on the balcony of their suite, laptop open but untouched, watching Luca through the glass door as the boy methodically arranged his toys before bedtime. His phone rang. The screen showed Caroline, his ex-wife and Luca's mother. "Hi, Caroline," he answered, his voice neutral. "How is he?" she asked without preamble. "He's fine. The resort is quiet. Just what he needs. And how are you?" Elliot sighed. "Tired, but okay. You push yourself too hard, Elliot." "Always have." "What choice do I have? He needs—" "I know what he needs," Caroline interrupted. "I'm his mother, even if I'm not there." The old tension stretched between them. Caroline had left when Luca was 4, a year after he'd stopped speaking. She'd claimed she couldn't handle it. The silence, the specialists, the crushing weight of having a child who might never say "mommy" again. She'd moved to Europe, started a new life, sent generous checks for Luca's care but visited only twice a year. "I didn't call to fight," she said finally. I called because Dr. Hoffman contacted me. He's worried about you. I wish people would worry less about me and more about helping my son, Elliot said sharply. They're connected, Elliot. You're burning yourself out. You can't help Luca if you collapse. Elliot watched his son through the glass. The way his small hands moved with such precision, lining up dinosaur figurines by height. I just want to hear his voice again, Elliot whispered, his own voice breaking. Just one word. Caroline was quiet for a moment. I want that too. But what if it doesn't happen? Can you live with that? Can you love him exactly as he is? Of course I love him, Elliot said fiercely. That's not what I asked, Caroline replied gently. I'll call in a few days to check in. Give him a kiss from me. After hanging up, Elliot went inside and sat on the floor beside Luca. The boy didn't look up, focused entirely on his dinosaurs. Time for bed, buddy, Elliot said, fighting to keep his voice light. He helped Luca through their nightly routine, teeth brushing, pajamas, the weighted blanket arranged just so. When Luca was settled, Elliot read him a story about dinosaurs, the same one he'd read every night for months. Luca's eyes drifted closed, his breathing deep and even. I love you exactly as you are, Elliot whispered, echoing Caroline's question. But I miss you. I miss you so much. He brushed a curl from Luca's forehead and quietly left the room, leaving the door cracked open with the nightlight glowing softly. Back on the balcony, Elliot finally let the tears come, silent and hot, sliding down his face as he stared at the moon rising over the mountains. The next morning, after breakfast in their suite, Elliot took Luca for a walk around the resort grounds. As they approached the garden, Luca suddenly tugged on his father's hand, pulling him toward the stone bench from yesterday. Surprised, Elliot followed. You want to go to the garden again? When they reached the bench, Luca sat in the exact same spot as before and immediately began searching the ground for leaves. Elliot sat beside him, pulling out his phone to check emails while Luca was contentedly occupied. After about 20 minutes, Elliot received a call from his company's board of directors. He stood up, walking a few paces away, but keeping Luca in his sight. This will just take a minute, buddy, he assured his son, who didn't acknowledge him. The call dragged on longer than expected, with crisis after crisis demanding Elliot's attention, despite his explicit instructions that he was not to be disturbed during this vacation. By the time he hung up, nearly half an hour had passed. When he turned back to the bench, Luca was gone. Panic surged through Elliot's body. Luca! He called, spinning around. Luca! He raced down the garden paths, his heart pounding, checking behind every bush and tree. How could he have been so careless? Luca never wandered off. It wasn't like him at all. As he rounded a corner near a small fountain, Elliot stopped dead in his tracks. There, kneeling on the ground beside a flower bed, was the maid from yesterday, Nova, and next to her, carefully lining up small stones in a row, was Luca. They weren't talking. They weren't even looking at each other. They were simply together, each focused on their own task, side by side in comfortable silence. Elliot approached slowly, not wanting to disrupt whatever fragile connection had formed. As he got closer, he noticed something astonishing. Luca was smiling, not the vacant smile he sometimes wore when stimming, but a real smile that reached his eyes. And he wasn't rocking or flapping. He was calm, present. Nova looked up as Elliot's shadow fell across them. She nodded politely but didn't speak. I'm sorry, Elliot said, his voice rough with emotion. He wandered off while I was on a call. Nova shook her head slightly, as if to say it was no trouble. She stood up, brushed off her uniform, and with one last gentle look at Luca, walked away toward the resort. Elliot sat down beside his son, watching in wonder as Luca continued placing stones in a line, completely at ease. Did you make a friend, buddy? He asked softly. Luca didn't answer, but he kept smiling as his fingers carefully positioned each stone. That night, after Luca was asleep, Elliot called the front desk. This is Elliot Brandt in the Eagle's Nest suite. There's a maid who works in the garden. Nova, I believe her name is. I'd like to speak with her manager. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at his door. Diane, the head of housekeeping, stood in the hallway looking concerned. Mr. Brandt? I'm Diane Williams, head of housekeeping. You asked about Nova James? Yes, please come in, Elliot said, leading her to the sitting area. There's no problem. Quite the opposite, actually. I want to know more about her. Diane relaxed slightly. Nova has been with us for 5 years. She's our most reliable employee. Is there something specific you wanted to know? Elliot ran a hand through his hair. My son, Luca, He has autism and hasn't spoken in 3 years. Today he wandered off and I found him with Nova in the garden. He was different with her, calm, happy even. Diane smiled knowingly. Nova has a special way about her. Some of our guests call her the silent healer. So she doesn't talk much, but she has this presence. The stressed executives, the arguing couples, they all seem calmer after she's been in their rooms. Does she have experience with autistic children? Diane's expression softened. Her younger brother was autistic, non-verbal too. He passed away when Nova was 18. She doesn't talk about it much, but I know she volunteers at a special needs camp every summer. Elliot absorbed this information, pieces falling into place. Thank you. That explains a lot. After Diane left, Elliot stood by Luca's bed, watching his son sleep peacefully. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Hope. The next morning, Elliot deliberately took Luca to the garden after breakfast. This time he brought the boy's favorite picture book and his tablet, prepared to stay longer. When they arrived at the stone bench, Luca immediately began looking around, his eyes searching. "Are you looking for your friend?" Elliot asked gently. As if on cue, Nova appeared from around a hedge carrying a watering can. She gave them a small nod, but continued with her work, moving gracefully among the flowers. Luca watched her intently, then slid off the bench and walked toward her. Elliot tensed, ready to intervene. Luca rarely approached strangers willingly, but the boy simply knelt down near Nova and began picking up fallen petals, arranging them in a line just as he had done with the leaves and stones. Nova continued watering plants, but she shifted slightly, making room for Luca beside her. Without a word or even a direct look, she had welcomed him into her space. And for the next hour, they worked side by side in comfortable silence, while Elliot watched from the bench, amazed and moved by what he was seeing. His son, who flinched from most human contact, was voluntarily sharing space with this quiet, gentle woman. No demands, no pressure, just peaceful coexistence. When it was time for lunch, Elliot approached them. "Luca, we need to go eat now." Luca stood up obediently but looked back at Nova with clear reluctance to leave. "Thank you," Elliot said to Nova, "for being kind to my son." Nova looked up at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were dark and expressive in her composed face. "He's a wonderful boy," she said softly, her voice low and melodious. They were the first words Elliot had heard her speak, and they washed over him like a benediction. Not pity, not clinical assessment, just simple appreciation for who his son was. As they walked away, Luca reached up and took Elliot's hand, a rare voluntary gesture that made Elliot's heart clench with sudden emotion. He looked back once to see Nova watching them, a gentle smile on her face, before she returned to her flowers. Something was happening here in this mountain garden, something Elliot couldn't explain or quantify, but for the first time in years, he was willing to let go of control and simply let it unfold. Because for the first time in years, his son was smiling. Over the next 2 days, a routine developed. After breakfast, Elliot would bring Luca to the garden where Nova worked. The boy would immediately seek her out, and they would spend an hour side by side. Nova tending flowers, Luca arranging leaves, stones, or petals in perfect lines. Elliot would sit on the bench watching them, answering emails on his phone, but mostly just marveling at how comfortable his son seemed in Nova's presence. On the third morning, Elliot decided to try something different. After helping Luca get dressed, he knelt in front of his son. "Luca, I have a meeting call I can't miss. Would you be okay going to the garden by yourself? Nova will be there." Luca didn't answer, of course, but he walked to the door and waited, something he never did. Usually he needed coaxing to leave their room. Elliot walked him to the garden entrance, pointed to where Nova was kneeling by the daisy bed, and watched in amazement as Luca walked straight to her without hesitation. From a distance, hidden behind a large hedge, Elliot observed their interaction. Nova looked up as Luca approached, her face brightening with a gentle smile. She didn't speak or reach for him. She simply shifted slightly, making space for him beside her as she had each day. Luca sat down and began picking up yellow petals that had fallen from the daisies. After arranging a few in a line, he paused and looked at Nova directly, something he rarely did with anyone, even Elliot. Nova met his gaze calmly, then looked down at his line of petals and nodded approvingly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small blue stone, smooth and polished. She placed it at the end of Luca's line of petals. The boy stared at it for a long moment, then carefully picked it up, examined it, and put it back. this time at the beginning of his line creating a pattern. Stone, petal, petal, petal. Nova smiled and continued her gardening. Elliot felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent thousands of dollars on therapists who tried to engage Luca in similar activities, but his son had always resisted. Yet here, with this quiet maid, Luca was not only participating, but initiating interaction. Why her? Elliot whispered to himself. What is she doing that none of us could? The answer eluded him, but he couldn't deny the evidence before his eyes. Something about Nova's presence was reaching his son in ways no one else had managed. His phone buzzed with a reminder about his conference call. With one last look at Luca and Nova, Elliot slipped away, his heart lighter than it had been in years. That afternoon, Elliot returned to the garden to find Luca still with Nova. They had moved to the fountain area where Nova was sweeping the stone pathway. Luca sat nearby, playing with a small pile of smooth pebbles from the fountain's edge. "Hi," Elliot said, approaching them. "I hope he wasn't any trouble." Nova looked up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "No trouble," she said in her soft voice. "He's been helping me." Elliot raised his eyebrows. "Helping?" She nodded toward the path where Elliot could see that someone had arranged pebbles along the edge in a decorative pattern. "Luca did that?" he asked, astonished. "Yes, he has a good eye for patterns." Elliot knelt down to look at his son's work. The pebbles were arranged by size and color, creating a pleasing rhythm along the pathway. "That's beautiful, buddy," he said to Luca, who was focused on adding another pebble to his creation. Nova leaned on her broom, watching them. "He likes order," she observed. "Things that make sense." "Yes," Elliot agreed, surprised by her insight. "His therapists call it rigid thinking, but maybe he just sees a better pattern than we do," Nova finished quietly. Elliot looked up at her, struck by her words. "Exactly, that's exactly it." Their eyes met for a moment, and Elliot felt an unexpected connection, the shared understanding of someone who saw Luca not as a problem to be fixed, but as a complete person with his own way of being in the world. Nova broke the gaze first, looking down at her broom. "I should finish my work." "Of course," Elliot said, standing up. "We've taken enough of your time." "You haven't," she said simply. Then, with a small smile at Luca, she added, "You're welcome in the garden any time." As they walked back to their suite, Elliot found himself thinking about Nova, not just her effect on Luca, but about her, the gentle grace in her movements, the quiet wisdom in her few words, the kindness in her eyes when she looked at his son. It had been a long time since he'd noticed such things about anyone. That evening after dinner, there was a knock at their suite door. When Elliot opened it, he found Diane, the head of housekeeping. "Mr. Brandt, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all. Is everything okay?" Diane twisted her hands nervously. "Well, it's about Nova. She mentioned that your son has been spending time with her in the garden." Elliot tensed. "Is that a problem? She said it was okay." "Oh, it's fine. That's not why I'm here." Diane lowered her voice. "It's just that Nova never gets involved with guests. She keeps to herself. So when she asked if she could adjust her schedule to be in the garden at the same time each day for the rest of your stay, well, I thought you should know." "She did that?" Elliot asked, surprised. Diane nodded. "She's never asked for anything like that before. Your son must be very special to her." After Diane left, Elliot sat on the couch, lost in thought. The idea that Nova had rearranged her schedule for Luca touched him deeply. In a world where most people, including Luca's own mother, found his son too difficult, too demanding, this woman was going out of her way to spend time with him. He looked over at Luca, who was sitting on the floor with his dinosaurs, arranging them in complex patterns that made sense only to him. "You like Nova, don't you, buddy?" Elliot asked softly. Luca didn't look up, but his hands paused briefly over the dinosaurs, as if the name had registered. "I think she likes you too," Elliot continued. "She sees how special you are." He took out his phone and found himself searching for information about communicating with non-verbal children. Not the clinical articles and research papers he usually read, but personal stories. Parents and caregivers sharing their experiences. One account from a mother caught his attention. "I spent years trying to pull my daughter into my world. It wasn't until I stepped into hers that we truly connected." Elliot read those words over and over, a new understanding dawning. All this time he'd been trying to get Luca to respond in the ways he thought were normal, important. Words, eye contact, conventional play. But Nova didn't seem to expect any of that. She simply created a space where Luca could be himself, and then joined him there. "I've been doing it all wrong," Elliot whispered, watching his son's careful movements with the dinosaurs. He set his phone aside and slid down to the floor beside Luca. "Can I play too?" he asked, not expecting an answer. To his surprise, Luca pushed a small red dinosaur toward him. Elliot picked it up, studying it carefully, then placed it in line with the others, following the pattern Luca had created. His son didn't look at him or smile, but he didn't remove the dinosaur either. They sat together in silence, arranging and rearranging the toys until bedtime. It wasn't a breakthrough. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a beginning. The next morning, Elliot woke early. While Luca still slept, he went to the hotel gift shop and purchased a small stuffed dinosaur and a yellow flower pin. When they went to the garden after breakfast, Nova was already there, kneeling by the rose bushes with pruning shears. She looked up as they approached, her eyes warm. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," Elliot replied. "Luca has something for you." He gently placed the dinosaur in his son's hand and guided him forward. Luca held the toy stiffly, not moving. Nova set down her shears and waited, patient and still. After a long moment, Luca took a step forward and placed the dinosaur on the ground between them. "Thank you, Luca," Nova said, picking it up with a smile. "I love dinosaurs." She placed the toy carefully on the edge of her gardening basket, where it would stay clean and dry. Elliot then approached, holding out the flower pin. "And this is from me. A small thank you for your kindness to my son." Nova hesitated before accepting the pin. "It's not necessary. I enjoy Luca's company." "I know. That's why I wanted to thank you." Elliot's voice grew rough. "Most people see his autism first. They try to fix him, change him. You just see him." Nova's eyes softened. "I had a brother like Luca, Michael. He taught me to listen differently." It was the most personal thing she'd shared, and Elliot felt honored by her trust. "Would you join us for lunch today?" he asked impulsively. "If you're free, I mean." Nova looked surprised, then uncertain. "I don't usually—" "Please," Elliot said. "Luca would love it, and so would I." She glanced at Luca, who had settled nearby and was arranging pine cones. "Okay," she said finally. "I have a break at noon." At noon, they met at the resort's casual outdoor cafe. Nova had changed from her work uniform into a simple blue dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She looked different, younger somehow, though just as composed. Luca, who usually fussed in restaurants, sat quietly coloring the children's menu. He didn't acknowledge Nova directly, but Elliot noticed how his son's body was angled toward her, his movements calmer in her presence. "Do you live nearby?" Elliot asked as they waited for their food. Nova nodded. "In town, about 20 minutes away. Have you always lived here?" "No." She took a sip of water. "I moved here after Michael died. He loved the mountains." The simple statement held volumes of unspoken grief. Elliot wanted to ask more but hesitated, sensing her privacy. "Diane mentioned you volunteer at a special needs camp?" Nova's face brightened. "Camp Sunflower. It's for children and young adults with autism and other developmental differences. I teach gardening there on weekends." "That sounds wonderful." "It is." For the first time, Nova's voice became animated. The children connect with nature in such pure ways. They notice things others miss. Patterns in leaves, the specific songs of different birds, the exact texture of bark on different trees. "Like Luca with his patterns," Elliot observed. "Yes." Nova smiled at the boy, who was meticulously coloring each section of his placemat, a different shade of blue. "He has extraordinary focus." Their food arrived, a grilled cheese cut into dinosaur shapes for Luca, salads for the adults. Nova waited until Elliot had helped Luca get settled before starting her own meal. "May I ask about his mother?" she said quietly. Elliot tensed slightly. "Caroline. She left when Luca was 4, about a year after he stopped speaking. She lives in Paris now. That must be difficult for both of you." "It was her choice," Elliot said, more sharply than he intended. Then, softer, "I'm sorry. It's still a sore spot. Of course. She was a marketing executive when we met. Brilliant, ambitious. We both were. Then Luca came along and he was perfect, happy, talking, developing normally, until he wasn't." Elliot took a deep breath. "After he was diagnosed, Caroline tried, but she couldn't handle it. Said she wasn't cut out to be a special needs parent, so she left." Nova didn't offer platitudes or judgment. She simply listened, her dark eyes compassionate. "What about your family?" Elliot asked, wanting to shift the focus. "My parents still live in Chicago. They're both teachers." Nova smiled faintly. "They were wonderful with Michael. Patient, loving. They taught me everything I know about caring for others. They must be proud of you." Nova looked down at her plate. "They worry that I'm too isolated here. They want me to move back to Chicago, go back to school. You were in school? Psychology. I was studying to be a therapist for children with special needs. But after Michael died, she trailed off. I needed space. Simplicity. Elliot nodded, understanding. Sometimes the weight of expectations, your own and others, became too heavy to bear. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, both watching Luca as he carefully ate each dinosaur shape in order of size. He's a beautiful child, Nova said suddenly, so present in his own way. Elliot felt his throat tighten. Thank you for seeing that. Most people just see what's missing. Nothing's missing, Nova said with quiet certainty. He's exactly who he's meant to be. Those simple words filled a hollow place in Elliot's heart, a place carved out by years of doctors' grim prognoses, therapists' measured goals, and his own desperate wishes for his son to be different. After lunch, as they walked back toward the garden, Elliot found himself telling Nova about his company, his work, parts of himself he rarely shared with anyone anymore. You must be very good at solving problems, Nova observed. Elliot laughed without humor, except the ones that really matter. Maybe some things aren't problems to be solved. Nova looked at Luca, who was walking ahead of them, stopping occasionally to examine a leaf or stone. Maybe they're just different ways of being in the world. Before Elliot could respond, Luca suddenly darted forward, breaking their usual walking pattern. He ran to a flower bed where yellow daisies grew in abundance and carefully picked one, its stem short. Then, to Elliot's astonishment, Luca turned and walked directly to Nova. He held out the flower to her, his eyes focused on her shoulder rather than her face. Nova knelt down slowly, meeting him at eye level. Thank you, Luca, she said, taking the flower gently. It's beautiful. Luca didn't smile or speak, but he held her gaze for a brief moment before turning away, a moment of connection that left Elliot stunned. Nova tucked the daisy behind her ear, her eyes shining with emotion. I've never seen him do that, Elliot said, his voice rough. Give something to someone voluntarily. Nova didn't reply, but the look on her face, wonder mixed with understanding, told Elliot she recognized the significance of Luca's gesture. As they reached the garden entrance, Nova checked her watch. I should get back to work. Of course. Elliot hesitated, then added, Thank you for joining us. It meant a lot. To both of us. I enjoyed it, she said simply. Then, with a small smile for Luca and a nod to Elliot, she walked back toward the resort, the yellow daisy bright against her dark hair. Elliot watched her go, a strange feeling blooming in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a very long time, something like hope, but warmer. That evening, Elliot sat on the balcony with his laptop, trying to focus on work emails, but finding his thoughts drifting continually to lunch with Nova. There had been something so refreshing about her quiet presence, her thoughtful words, the way she saw Luca as complete and perfect, just as he was. His phone rang. Caroline again. Hello, he answered, bracing himself. How are things going? She asked, her voice tinny with distance. Good, actually. Really good. You sound different. Did something happen? Elliot hesitated, then found himself telling her about Nova, about Luca's response to her, about the daisy and the dinosaur. That's wonderful, Elliot, Caroline said when he finished. It sounds like this woman has a real gift. She does. She sees him, Caroline. Really sees him. And how do you see her? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? Come on, Elliot. I know that tone in your voice. You're interested in her. It's not like that, he protested, though a part of him wondered if it was. I just appreciate what she's doing for Luca. Caroline said skeptically. Well, be careful. Remember what happened with that therapist last year? Elliot winced at the memory. He'd briefly dated one of Luca's speech therapists, only to discover she was more interested in being associated with tech billionaire Elliot Brandt than in actually being a part of Luca's life. Nova's different, he said firmly. I hope so for both your sakes. Caroline paused. Look, I know I'm the last person who should give advice about Luca, but don't rush this. Whatever's happening with him is fragile, special. I know. After they hung up, Elliot went inside to check on Luca. The boy was sitting in the middle of his bed, carefully examining the blue stone Nova had given him days earlier. He turned it over and over in his small hands, his expression focused and calm. Elliot sat on the edge of the bed. You really like Nova, don't you, buddy? Luca didn't answer, but he held the stone up, as if showing it to his father. It's a beautiful stone, Elliot said, reaching out slowly to touch it. Nova gave that to you, didn't she? For the briefest moment, Luca's eyes met his, a flash of connection that made Elliot's heart leap. Then the boy returned his attention to the stone, running his fingers over its smooth surface. Elliot stayed there, simply being present with his son, following Nova's example. No demands, no expectations, just quiet companionship. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, the silence between them felt not like a barrier, but like a bridge. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Elliot woke feeling more rested than he had in months. Even Luca seemed eager for the day, getting dressed without resistance and hurrying through breakfast. "Ready to go to the garden?" Elliot asked, though he knew the answer. As they walked through the lobby, the front desk clerk called out to him, "Mr. Brandt, there's a package for you." Elliot was surprised. A package? The clerk handed him a small box wrapped in simple brown paper. "It was left for you this morning." Curious, Elliot unwrapped it as they continued toward the garden. Inside was a children's book titled The Silent Garden and a handwritten note. This was Michael's favorite book. "I thought Luca might enjoy it too. The pictures tell the story without words." Nova Elliot felt touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. When they reached the garden, he looked around for Nova, but she wasn't at her usual spot by the flower beds. "Let's sit and wait for her," he told Luca, leading him to their bench. He opened the book Nova had given them. The illustrations were beautiful, a garden coming to life through the seasons, animals and insects finding homes among the plants, all without a single word of text. Luca leaned against him, surprisingly engaged by the pictures. They sat together, turning the pages slowly, Elliot occasionally pointing out details. "Look at the butterfly, Luca. See how its wings match the flower?" They were so absorbed in the book that Elliot didn't notice the resort manager approaching until the man cleared his throat. "Mr. Brandt, I'm Thomas Hayes, the general manager." Elliot looked up. "Yes? I wanted to let you know that Nova James won't be in today. She called in this morning. Family emergency. She asked me to tell you she's very sorry. Is she okay?" Elliot asked, concerned. "I believe so. She mentioned something about her father being in the hospital, but it didn't sound critical. Thank you for letting me know." As the manager walked away, Elliot felt a strange sense of loss. He looked down at Luca, wondering how his son would react to Nova's absence. "Nova can't be here today, buddy," he said gently, "but we can still enjoy the garden and look at the book she sent you." To his relief, Luca seemed content to continue looking at the book, though his eyes occasionally scanned the garden as if searching for Nova. They spent the morning in the garden, then had lunch at the cafe before returning to their suite for Luca's afternoon rest time. Throughout the day, Elliot found himself thinking about Nova, hoping her family emergency wasn't too serious. That evening, as Luca was getting ready for bed, Elliot's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Nova. Diane gave me your number. I wanted to apologize for my absence today. My father had a minor heart scare, but he's stable now. I'll be back tomorrow. I hope Luca liked the book." Elliot felt a rush of relief, both at the news about her father and the knowledge that she would return. He texted back, "I'm glad your father is okay. Luca loved the book. We read it 3 times today. We missed you in the garden." After a moment's hesitation, he added, "I missed you too." He sent the message before he could reconsider, then set his phone aside to help Luca into bed. The boy was clutching Nova's book to his chest, unwilling to let it go even for sleep. "Okay, you can keep it," Elliot said, tucking the weighted blanket around his son. "Sweet dreams, buddy." When he checked his phone later, there was a new message from Nova. "Thank you. That means a lot. See you both tomorrow in the garden." Simple words, but they made Elliot smile as he drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Elliot and Luca headed to the garden earlier than usual. Nova was already there, kneeling by a bed of white roses. She looked up as they approached, her face lighting with a smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," Elliot replied. "How's your father?" "Better. Thank you for asking." She turned to Luca. "Hello, Luca. Did you like the book?" In answer, Luca pulled the book from his backpack and held it up, his expression serious. "I think that's a yes," Elliot laughed. "He slept with it last night." Nova's eyes softened. "Michael used to do the same thing." She returned to her gardening, and Luca settled near her with a collection of small stones. Elliot sat on the bench, watching them together, struck again by how natural they looked side by side, 2 quiet souls finding peace in each other's company. After a while, Nova stood up and brushed dirt from her hands. "I need to get fresh soil from the shed. I'll be right back." As she walked away, Luca looked up, watching her go. Then, to Elliot's surprise, the boy stood and followed her, keeping a careful distance but clearly intending to go where she went. Elliot followed too, curious. The garden shed was a small wooden structure, tucked behind a row of tall hedges. Nova went inside, while Luca waited patiently at the door. When she emerged with a bag of soil, she smiled at finding him there. "Would you like to help me, Luca?" she asked gently. She handed him a small watering can, just the right size for his hands. Luca took it solemnly and followed her back to the flower bed. Nova showed him how to carefully water each plant, not too much, not too little. Luca followed her example with intense concentration, his movements deliberate and precise. "That's perfect," Nova told him when he'd finished. "You're a natural gardener." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a yellow flower, not a daisy this time, but a small sunflower. She held it out to Luca. The boy stared at it for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he reached out and took it. He examined it carefully, turning it in his hands just as he had done with the blue stone. Then he looked up at Nova, right into her eyes. His lips moved slightly, forming a shape that might have been a word. Elliot froze, hardly daring to breathe. Nova knelt down to Luca's level, her expression calm but attentive. "What is it, Luca?" she asked softly. Luca looked at the flower again, then back at Nova. His lips moved again, and this time the faintest whisper emerged. "Flower." The word was barely audible, just a breath of sound, but it was clear, unmistakable. Nova's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't speak, just knelt there, overwhelmed. Elliot, watching from a few feet away, felt the world tilt beneath him. His legs went weak, and he gripped the edge of a nearby planter for support. Because in 6 years he had never heard his son say a word. Time seemed to stop in the garden. "Flower," Luca had said. A single whispered word that changed everything. Elliot couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His son, his beautiful silent son, had spoken. The world blurred as tears filled his eyes. Nova remained kneeling before Luca, her hands still covering her mouth, her eyes shining with tears. She slowly lowered her hands and smiled at the boy. "Yes," she said softly, "that's a flower, a sunflower." Luca looked down at the yellow bloom in his hand, his expression serious and focused. Elliot finally found his legs and moved forward, kneeling beside them both. "Luca," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You said, flower." The boy didn't look at him, still fixated on the sunflower, turning it slowly in his small hands. Elliot looked at Nova, his eyes asking 1,000 questions. How? Why now? Why with her? Nova seemed to understand his unspoken thoughts. She shook her head slightly, indicating this wasn't the moment for analysis. It was a moment to simply be present with what had happened. They both remained kneeling beside Luca, watching as he continued to examine the sunflower with the same meticulous attention he gave to all his treasures. After what seemed like an eternity, Elliot gently placed his hand on his son's shoulder. "Luca, can you say it again? Can you say flower?" Luca didn't respond. The moment had passed. Disappointment flickered across Elliot's face, but Nova touched his arm lightly. "It's okay," she said softly. "He spoke once. He can speak again." Elliot nodded, taking a deep breath to compose himself. "You're right. You're right." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and wonder. "Thank you. I don't know how, but thank you." Nova smiled, a full, radiant smile that transformed her usually composed face. "Don't thank me. It was Luca. He was ready." They both stood up, giving Luca space to continue his careful examination of the sunflower. Elliot ran a hand through his hair, still trying to process what had happened. "I should call his doctors," he said, reaching for his phone. "His therapists. They need to know about this." Nova nodded, but there was a hint of caution in her eyes. "Just remember," she said gently, "this was his moment, on his terms." Elliot paused, understanding her meaning. The specialists would want to analyze, test, implement new therapy plans. They would try to replicate what had happened, to build on it systematically. And while that was necessary, important even, there was something pure about this moment that he didn't want to lose in a flurry of clinical assessments. "You're right," he said, putting his phone back in his pocket. "This is our moment first. The doctors can wait until tomorrow." Nova's smile returned, warm with approval. "I should get back to work," she said, glancing at her watch. "My break ended 15 minutes ago." "Of course." Elliot hesitated, then added, "Would you join us for dinner tonight in our suite? I'd like to talk more about what happened, and I think Luca would like to have you there." Nova looked uncertain. "I don't want to intrude on your family time." "You wouldn't be. Please." She glanced at Luca, who was now carefully placing the sunflower on the ground beside a row of stones. "Okay," she said softly. "What time?" "7, after my shift ends." "7 is perfect, thank you." As Nova gathered her gardening tools and headed back toward the resort, Elliot sat down on the bench watching Luca play. His mind was racing with questions, hopes, fears. Would Luca speak again? Was this the beginning of his son finding his voice, or just a beautiful, isolated moment? What had Nova done differently that all the expensive specialists couldn't accomplish? But beneath all these questions was a feeling so powerful it made his chest ache. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy at hearing his son's voice after so many years of silence. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "Nova's coming for dinner tonight. Would you like that?" Luca didn't respond, but he picked up the sunflower again, holding it carefully as he continued arranging his stones. Back in their suite, Elliot called room service to arrange a special dinner. He wanted everything to be perfect. Luca's favorite foods, a quiet atmosphere, nothing that might overwhelm his son or disrupt the fragile magic that seemed to be unfolding. While Luca napped, Elliot paced the living room, alternating between ecstatic hope and cautious restraint. He wanted so badly to believe this was a turning point, but years of disappointment had taught him to protect his heart. His phone rang. Caroline again. He answered immediately. "Caroline, you won't believe what happened," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "Luca spoke today. He said, 'flower.'" There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. "What? Elliot, are you serious?" "Yes." It was just one word, barely a whisper, but it was clear. "He said it to Nova, the maid I told you about." "Oh my God!" Caroline's voice broke. "Our baby spoke." "Yes," Elliot said, his own voice thick with emotion. "He really did." Caroline began to cry softly. Despite everything that had happened between them, this was a moment they shared. Parents who had both mourned when their child's words had disappeared 3 years ago. "Tell me everything," she said. Elliot described the scene in detail. The garden, the sunflower, the quiet moment when Luca had formed that precious word. "It's a miracle," Caroline whispered when he finished. "It's Nova," Elliot said firmly. "Something about her approach, her presence. She's reached him in a way no one else has been able to." "I wish I could be there," Caroline said, a note of regret in her voice. "You could be," Elliot replied, the words escaping before he could stop them. "You could fly back." There was a long pause. "Elliot, I know. You have your life there. I just thought—" "It's not that simple," Caroline interrupted. "You know that, but I'll come for a visit soon, I promise. I want to meet this Nova woman, and I want to hear Luca's voice myself." After they hung up, Elliot sat on the couch, staring out at the mountains beyond their balcony. Caroline's response was typical, emotional but distant, involved but separate. He'd learned to expect nothing more. His phone buzzed with a text message from Nova. "Is there anything I should bring for dinner?" He smiled, typing back, "Just yourself. We're looking forward to it." At 7 o'clock exactly, there was a soft knock at the suite door. Elliot opened it to find Nova standing there, no longer in her work uniform, but in a simple blue dress, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She held a small gift bag. "Hi," she said, her voice as gentle as always. "I hope this isn't too much, but I brought something for Luca." "Please, come in," Elliot said, suddenly aware of his racing heart. "And gifts are always welcome." Nova stepped inside, looking around the luxurious suite with quiet appreciation. "This is lovely. The hotel's finest," Elliot said with a small smile. "One of the perks of being a tech millionaire. You get the best rooms." Nova's eyes met his, a hint of amusement in their dark depths. "I've cleaned this suite many times. The view is spectacular." Elliot laughed, feeling unexpectedly light-hearted. "I hadn't thought of that. Of course you've been here before." Luca was sitting on the floor by the coffee table, arranging colored blocks in complex patterns. He didn't look up when Nova entered, but his hands paused briefly, as if he sensed her presence. "Hello, Luca," Nova said, kneeling down a short distance from him. "I brought you something." She placed the gift bag on the floor between them, not pushing it toward him, simply making it available if he wanted it. Luca continued with his blocks for a few minutes, seemingly ignoring the bag. Then, without warning, he reached for it and pulled out the tissue paper. Inside was a small plant in a blue ceramic pot, a miniature sunflower, its bright yellow petals just beginning to open. Luca stared at it, his expression unreadable. "It's a sunflower," Nova explained softly, "like the one in the garden, but this one is yours to keep and watch grow." Elliot watched, holding his breath. hoping against hope that Luca might speak again. But the boy simply placed the potted plant carefully among his blocks, incorporating it into his pattern. "He likes it," Elliot said, grateful for the thoughtful gift. "Thank you." Nova stood up, smoothing her dress. "You're welcome. Dinner should be here soon," Elliot said, gesturing toward the dining area. "I hope you like steak." "I do," Nova replied with a small smile, "though I don't eat it often." There was a knock at the door, room service arriving with their meal. The server wheeled in a cart and efficiently set the table, placing covered dishes in the center. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Brandt?" the young man asked. "No, thank you. This looks perfect." After the server left, Elliot helped Luca wash his hands and guided him to the table. The boy sat quietly, his eyes occasionally darting to Nova, then away again. Elliot removed the covers from the dishes, revealing a feast. Tender steaks, baked potatoes with all the toppings, fresh vegetables, and for Luca, chicken fingers cut into perfect dinosaur shapes. "This looks wonderful," Nova said, as Elliot poured sparkling water into her glass. "I wanted to celebrate," he replied simply. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, Elliot helping Luca cut his food into the precise, equal pieces he preferred. Nova watched their interaction with a soft smile. "You're very good with him," she observed. Elliot looked surprised. "Am I? Most of the time I feel like I'm failing him." "You're not," Nova said firmly. "You see him. You respect his needs. That's more than many parents manage." Her words soothed a wound Elliot had carried for years, the constant gnawing fear that he wasn't doing enough, wasn't being enough for his special son. "His mother left because she couldn't handle it," he said quietly. "Sometimes I wonder if she was right. If it's too much for one person." Nova considered this. "It can be overwhelming," she acknowledged. "My parents took turns being strong for each other when things were hard with Michael. Having a partner does make a difference." "Is that why you work with special needs children? Because of your brother?" Nova nodded. "Michael taught me patience, how to communicate without words, how to find joy in small victories." She smiled at Luca, who was carefully sorting his vegetables by color. "Like today." "I still can't believe he spoke," Elliot said, his voice filled with wonder. "After all this time." "I'm not surprised," Nova said. Elliot raised his eyebrows. "You're not?" "No. He's been communicating all along, just not with words. The way he arranges things, the patterns he creates, that's his language. Today, he simply added a spoken word to it." Elliot considered this perspective. The specialists are always focused on getting him to use words, to communicate our way. "But you're saying we should be learning his language too?" "Exactly." Nova's eyes lit up with passion. "Michael had his own dictionary of movements and sounds. My parents and I learned to read them. It wasn't that he couldn't communicate, it was that we had to learn how to listen differently." "That's what you've been doing with Luca in the garden," Elliot realized. "You've been listening to him in his language." Nova nodded, "and respecting that it's a complete language, not a deficient one." Elliot felt a paradigm shift occurring in his mind, a fundamental change in how he viewed his son's silence, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a different form of communication to be understood. "Will you teach me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you show me how to listen to him the way you do?" Nova's expression softened. "I think you already know how. You just need to trust yourself more." As they continued eating, Elliot found himself sharing more about his life, his company, the pressure of being in the public eye, the loneliness of single parenthood. Nova listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights that suggested a wisdom beyond her years. "What about you?" Elliot asked eventually. "You mentioned you were studying psychology before. Have you thought about going back?" A shadow crossed Nova's face. "Sometimes. But after Michael died, I needed simplicity. Working with my hands, caring for growing things, it helps me feel grounded, connected." "I understand that," Elliot said. "After Caroline left, I buried myself in work for months. It was the only thing that made sense. And now? Now I'm learning to be present, to slow down." He smiled at her. "You're helping with that too." Nova's cheeks colored slightly, and she looked down at her plate. "I'm glad." They were interrupted by a small sound from Luca. He had finished eating and was looking at his empty plate with a slight frown. "All done, buddy?" Elliot asked. "Do you want some ice cream for dessert?" To his astonishment, Luca looked up and said clearly, though quietly, "Blue." Elliot froze, his fork suspended midway to his mouth. Nova's eyes widened. "Did he just—" Elliot began. "He did," Nova confirmed, her voice filled with wonder. "He said, blue." Elliot set down his fork, his hands trembling slightly. "Luca," he said gently. "What did you say, buddy?" Luca looked at him directly, a rare occurrence that made Elliot's heart race. "Blue," the boy repeated, then pointed to the empty plate. Elliot suddenly understood. "He wants the blue plate," he said, remembering that they had a set of colored plates in the kitchenette, the one we used yesterday for ice cream. He got up and found the plate in question, a simple blue ceramic dish they'd used for Luca's dessert the previous evening. He placed it in front of his son, who nodded once in satisfaction. "Blue," Luca said again, running his finger along the plate's edge. Elliot sat back down, overwhelmed. 2 words in one day after 3 years of silence. He looked at Nova, who was watching Luca with a gentle smile. "This is really happening," he whispered. "Yes," she said simply. "It is." After dinner, they moved to the living area where Luca returned to his blocks, now incorporating both the blue plate and the sunflower plant into his construction. Elliot and Nova sat on the couch, watching him play. "I don't know how to thank you," Elliot said quietly. "What you've done for him, for us, it's beyond words." Nova shook her head. "I didn't do anything special. I just let him be who he is. That is special. In a world that's constantly trying to make him fit in, you made space for him to be himself." Elliot hesitated, then added, "I've never met anyone like you." Nova looked down, a hint of color in her cheeks again. "I should probably go," she said, glancing at her watch. "It's getting late." "Of course." Elliot stood up, suddenly reluctant for the evening to end. "Can I walk you to your car? I took the staff shuttle today, but I can call a taxi." "No need. I'll drive you home." Nova looked uncertain. "That's not necessary. Please, it's the least I can do." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "Thank you." Elliot arranged for a resort babysitter to stay with Luca, a service they provided for guests with children. The young woman who arrived was one Luca had met before and seemed comfortable with. "We won't be long," Elliot told her. "He should be ready for bed in about 30 minutes. His routine is written down on the nightstand." "No problem, Mr. Brandt," the sitter replied cheerfully. "Luca and I will be fine." Before they left, Nova knelt down beside Luca. "Good night, Luca. Thank you for dinner." The boy didn't look up from his blocks, but he pushed the small sunflower plant toward her slightly, then pulled it back, a subtle acknowledgement of her presence. Nova smiled, understanding the gesture. "I'll see you tomorrow in the garden," she promised. Elliot's luxury SUV purred quietly as they drove down the winding mountain road toward town. Nova sat beside him in the passenger seat, gazing out at the night sky. "It's beautiful here," she said softly, "especially at night." "It is," Elliot agreed, glancing at her profile illuminated by the dashboard lights. "I can see why you stayed." "Where do you live?" Nova asked. "When you're not at luxury resorts?" "San Francisco. We have a house in Pacific Heights. Too big, really, for just the 2 of us. But it has a garden that Luca loves and it's close to his doctor's." "Do you like it there?" Elliot considered the question. "It's convenient. Good schools, good medical care, but it's also busy, loud. Sometimes I think about moving somewhere quieter, somewhere Luca could have more space, more peace." "Like here?" Nova suggested with a small smile. "Maybe," Elliot said, surprising himself with how appealing the idea suddenly seemed. "Though I'd have to figure out the company situation. Being a CEO isn't exactly a remote work position." "What does your company do exactly?" Nova asked. "I know you're in tech, but we develop accessibility software," Elliot explained. "Programs that help people with disabilities use computers and smartphones more easily. Screen readers for the blind, alternative input devices for people with limited mobility, communication apps for non-verbal users." Nova looked at him with new understanding. "Because of Luca," Elliot nodded. "It started that way. When he was first diagnosed, I was frustrated by how limited the options were, so I decided to build something better." "That's remarkable," Nova said softly. "Taking something painful and creating something helpful from it." "It felt like the only thing I could control," Elliot admitted. "I couldn't fix what was happening with Luca, but I could try to make the world a little more accessible for him and others like him." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the road winding through pine forests before descending into the small mountain town. "Turn left at the next light," Nova directed, "then right at the bookstore." Elliot followed her directions, eventually pulling up in front of a small, well-kept cottage on the edge of town. A garden filled with flowers and herbs surrounded the house, visible even in the dim evening light. "This is me," Nova said. "Thank you for the ride." "Thank you for dinner," Elliot replied. "And for everything else." Nova smiled, her hand on the door handle. "Good night, Elliot." "Nova," he said suddenly before she could exit. Would you have dinner with me again? Just the two of us? She looked at him, her expression unreadable in the shadows. Are you asking me on a date, Mr. Brandt? Yes, Elliot said simply. I am. Nova was quiet for a moment. I don't think that's a good idea. Her response stung more than he expected. May I ask why? Because what's happening with Luca is fragile, she said gently. Special. I don't want to complicate it with other feelings. Elliot nodded slowly. I understand, and I respect that. Thank you. Nova opened the door, then paused. But I would like to keep helping with Luca, if that's okay. In the garden. Of course, Elliot said quickly. He needs you. Nova's eyes softened. He needs both of us. Good night, Elliot. She slipped out of the car and walked up the path to her front door. Elliot waited until she was safely inside before driving away, his emotions a complex tangle of disappointment, respect, and, most surprisingly, hope, because today his son had spoken not one word, but two, and tomorrow held the promise of more. Elliot returned to find Luca already asleep, the babysitter reading quietly on the couch. How was he? Elliot asked, keeping his voice low. Perfect, the young woman replied, gathering her things. He went to bed right on schedule. No fuss at all. After she left, Elliot checked on his son. Luca lay peacefully under his weighted blanket, one hand curled around the blue stone Nova had given him days earlier. Beside his bed, on the nightstand, sat the small sunflower plant. Elliot bent and kissed his son's forehead gently. Sweet dreams, buddy, he whispered. I love you so much. Back in the living room, he called Dr. Hoffman, despite the late hour. The doctor answered on the third ring, his voice concerned. Elliot, is everything all right? Better than all right, Elliot said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. Luca spoke today. 2 words, flower and blue. There was a moment of stunned silence. That's extraordinary. What prompted this? Elliot explained about Nova, about the garden, about the patient, pressure-free approach she'd taken with Luca. This is very encouraging, Dr. Hoffman said when Elliot had finished. But I want to caution you against expecting too much too quickly. Children with Luca's condition often show progress in spurts, followed by plateaus or even regression. I understand, Elliot said, though part of him wanted to reject the warning. But this feels different. It feels like a breakthrough. I hope it is, the doctor said sincerely. When you return home, we should schedule some additional assessments. This could indicate readiness for a different approach to his therapy. After hanging up, Elliot sat on the balcony for a long time, staring at the stars above the mountains. Dr. Hoffman's caution echoed in his mind, battling with the pure joy of hearing his son's voice after so many years of silence. Nova's words came back to him too. What's happening with Luca is fragile, special. She was right to protect that, to prioritize Luca's needs over any attraction between them. It was one of the things that made her so remarkable. Her clear-eyed wisdom, her gentle strength. Elliot realized with sudden clarity that he wasn't just attracted to Nova. He was falling in love with her quiet compassion, her patient understanding, the way she saw his son, and him, with such clear, accepting eyes. But she had set a boundary, and he would respect it. Luca's progress was too important, too precious to risk. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was Nova again. I forgot to tell you. Michael's first word after his regression was blue too, his favorite color. Just thought you might like to know. Good night. Elliot stared at the message, a lump forming in his throat. There was something almost cosmic about the connection between Nova's brother and his son, as if Michael, somewhere beyond this world, had sent Nova to help Luca find his voice again. Thank you for sharing that, he texted back. It means more than I can say. Good night, Nova. He went to bed with a lighter heart than he'd had in years, and slept deeply for the first time since Luca had fallen silent. The next morning, Elliot woke to find Luca already up, sitting on the floor beside his bed, the sunflower plant in his lap. The boy was talking to it, not in words, but in soft musical sounds, a private language all his own. Elliot remained still, not wanting to interrupt this rare, intimate moment. He watched as his son gently touched the yellow petals, his expression peaceful and focused. After a few minutes, Luca looked up and saw his father watching. Instead of turning away as he usually did, he held Elliot's gaze for a moment, then looked back at the plant. Flower, he said clearly. Joy flooded through Elliot's body, so intense it was almost painful. Yes, buddy, he managed to say. That's your flower. Luca nodded once, satisfied, and returned to his private communion with the plant. Elliot slipped out of bed and into the bathroom, where he allowed himself a moment of pure, overwhelming emotion, tears streaming down his face as he pressed a hand to his mouth to muffle his sobs of relief and gratitude. His son was coming back to him, one precious word at a time. After they were both dressed and had eaten breakfast, Elliot asked, "Do you want to go to the garden today, Luca, to see Nova?" Luca didn't answer verbally, but he went to the door and waited, his now familiar sign of readiness to go. When they reached the garden, Nova was there as always, kneeling by a bed of purple flowers. She looked up as they approached, her face brightening with a smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "Nova," Luca said clearly, surprising both adults. Nova's eyes widened, filling with tears. "Yes, Luca," she whispered. "I'm Nova." She held out her hand, palm up, not reaching for him, but offering connection if he wanted it. To Elliot's amazement, Luca placed his small hand in hers for just a moment, the briefest touch before pulling away. "3 words now," Elliot said, his voice rough with emotion. "Flower, blue, and Nova. And the most important ones," Nova replied, her own voice unsteady. "Things he loves." They spent the morning in the garden as usual, Luca arranging stones and leaves while Nova worked nearby. Elliot sat on the bench watching them, his heart fuller than he could remember it being in years. Around noon, Nova came to sit beside him, while Luca continued playing a few feet away. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," she said quietly. "About dinner." Elliot tensed slightly. "I meant what I said. I respect your decision. I know you do, and I appreciate that." Nova looked at her hands, then back at him. "But I've been thinking that maybe I was being too cautious." Hope flickered in Elliot's chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean that sometimes good things happen all at once," she said with a small smile. "Luca finding his voice and you and I finding each other." "So, dinner?" Elliot asked, hardly daring to believe what she seemed to be saying. Nova nodded. "Dinner. Just the 2 of us." Elliot wanted to take her hand, but he restrained himself, aware of Luca watching them with his peripheral vision. "Thank you," he said simply, "for reconsidering." "Thank you for understanding why I hesitated," she replied. "Luca has to come first, for both of us." "Always," Elliot agreed fervently. Nova stood up, brushing off her uniform. "I should get back to work, but I'll see you tonight. 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, Elliot confirmed. "I'll pick you up." As she walked away, Luca looked up from his play and watched her go. "Nova," he said again, the name clear on his lips. "Yes, buddy," Elliot said, kneeling beside his son. "That's Nova. She's special, isn't she?" Luca returned to his careful arrangement of stones, but there was a new ease in his movements, a contentment that Elliot hadn't seen in years. It felt like a new beginning, for all of them. That evening, Elliot dressed carefully for his date with Nova. He chose clothes that were nice but not ostentatious, dark jeans, a blue button-down shirt, a casual blazer. He wanted to look good for her, but he also wanted her to feel comfortable. The same babysitter arrived to stay with Luca, who was contentedly arranging his dinosaurs on the living room floor. "I won't be late," Elliot told the young woman. "Call me if he needs anything at all." Before leaving, he knelt beside his son. "I'm going to see Nova," he said gently. "I'll be back soon, okay?" Luca didn't look up from his dinosaurs, but he said clearly, "Nova." Elliot's heart swelled. "That's right, buddy. I'll tell her you said hi." The drive to Nova's cottage seemed shorter this time, the mountain road less winding. When he pulled up in front of her house, Elliot felt a flutter of nerves in his stomach, something he hadn't experienced in years. He was a tech CEO who regularly spoke to rooms full of investors and board members, yet the prospect of this dinner with Nova made him feel like a teenager on his first date. He walked up the garden path to her front door and knocked gently. A moment later, the door opened, and there she was. Nova had traded her usual simple dress for a flowing skirt and a soft sweater in a shade of blue that matched the evening sky. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders, and she wore a touch of makeup that enhanced her natural beauty without masking it. "Hi," she said, her voice as gentle as always, but with a hint of nervousness that matched his own. "Hi," Elliot replied, suddenly aware that he was staring. "You look beautiful." A blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you. Come in for a minute. I just need to get my purse." She led him into a small, cozy living room filled with plants and books. Photos lined the walls, many of them showing a young Nova with a boy who must have been Michael. The resemblance between them was striking. The same dark eyes, the same quiet dignity in their expressions. "That's Michael," Nova said, noticing where Elliot's gaze had landed. When he was about Luca's age, Elliot studied the photo, a smiling Nova, perhaps 12 or 13, with her arm around a solemn-faced boy of 6 or 7. "He looks like you." "People always said that," she replied with a soft smile. "He was my best friend." The simple statement held volumes of love and loss. Elliot felt honored that she had shared this glimpse of her brother with him. "I'm ready," Nova said, picking up a small purse from the coffee table. "Where are we going?" "There's a little restaurant in town I heard about," Elliot said as they walked back to his car. "The Blue Pine. They said it's quiet, good food." "Hey, it's my favorite place," Nova said, looking pleased. "How did you know?" "I asked Diane," Elliot admitted with a smile. "I wanted to take you somewhere you'd enjoy." The restaurant was indeed quiet and charming, with a rustic elegance that felt authentic rather than contrived. They were seated at a corner table beside a window overlooking a small garden illuminated by fairy lights. "This is lovely," Elliot said, looking around appreciatively. "I come here for my birthday every year," Nova told him. "They make the best trout almondine in the state." "Then that's what I'll have," Elliot decided, closing his menu. As they waited for their food, the conversation flowed easily between them. Elliot found himself sharing stories about his childhood, his early days building his company, his dreams for Luca's future. Nova listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite curiosity. In turn, she told him about growing up with Michael, about her parents' dedication to giving both their children a rich, full life despite the challenges. "They never treated him as less," she said, her eyes soft with memory. "They had expectations, boundaries, dreams for him, just like they did for me. They just adjusted those expectations to fit who he was, not who they wished he would be." "They sound like remarkable people." "They are," Nova agreed. "They taught me that love isn't about changing someone to fit your image of them. It's about creating space for them to be fully themselves." "That's what you've done for Luca," Elliot observed. Nova smiled. "And what you're learning to do. I've seen how you watch him, how you're starting to follow his lead rather than always directing him." Their food arrived, trout for both of them, served with roasted vegetables and crusty bread. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the soft music and candlelight creating an intimate atmosphere. "Can I ask you something personal?" Elliot said eventually. Nova nodded. "Of course. Why did you say no when I first asked you to dinner? Was it really just about Luca, or was there something else?" Nova set down her fork, considering the question. "It was partly about Luca," she admitted. "I didn't want to risk confusing the connection we were building." She paused, looking down at her plate. "But it was also about me." "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. "When Michael died, I closed off a part of myself. It was easier to be quiet, to focus on simple things like gardening and cleaning, to help others without getting too close." Her eyes met his. "You and Luca, you're making me feel things I haven't felt in a long time, and that's scary." Elliot reached across the table, offering his hand palm up, just as she had done with Luca that morning. After a moment's hesitation, Nova placed her hand in his. "I understand, scary," he said softly. "When Caroline left, I built walls around Luca and myself, walls made of work and therapy appointments and specialist consultations. I was so busy trying to fix everything that I forgot how to just live." "And now?" Nova asked. "Now I'm sitting in a beautiful restaurant with a remarkable woman, while my son is at home saying words for the first time in 3 years. Elliot smiled, his eyes bright with emotion. "I'm terrified and hopeful all at once." Nova's fingers tightened around his. "Me too." They finished dinner talking about lighter things, favorite books, movies, places they'd traveled. When the check came, Elliot insisted on paying despite Nova's protests. "Next time you can treat," he said with a smile that suggested he was already looking forward to that next time. Outside, the night was clear and cool, stars brilliant above the small mountain town. They walked slowly back to Elliot's car, neither in a hurry for the evening to end. "Would you like to take a short walk?" Nova suggested, pointing toward a nearby park. "It's beautiful at night." They strolled along a path lined with old-growth pines, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. The moon cast silver light across the landscape, creating a magical, otherworldly atmosphere. "I can see why you love it here," Elliot said, looking around at the mountains silhouetted against the night sky. "It's peaceful, healing." "It saved me after Michael died," Nova admitted. "The mountains, the quiet, the simple work. It gave me space to breathe again." "And now, is it still what you need?" Nova considered the question, her face thoughtful in the moonlight. "I don't know," she said honestly. For a long time, I thought this was enough. My cottage, my garden, my small life. But lately, Elliot prompted gently when she trailed off. Lately, I've been wondering if I'm hiding rather than healing. If it's time to step back into the world more fully. They had stopped walking, facing each other on the moonlit path. Elliot reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Whatever you decide," he said softly. "I'm glad our paths crossed here." Nova's eyes met his, dark and luminous in the silvery light. "So am I." The moment stretched between them, fragile and perfect. Then, with gentle deliberation, Elliot leaned forward and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, tender and questioning. Nova responded with equal gentleness, her hand coming up to rest lightly on his chest. When they parted, she smiled, a full, radiant smile that transformed her usually composed face. "That was nice," she whispered. "Very nice," Elliot agreed, his own smile matching hers. They continued their walk hand in hand now, talking softly about everything and nothing, the comfortable conversation of two people discovering the joy of each other's company. When they finally returned to Nova's cottage, Elliot walked her to the door. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "For dinner, for the walk, for everything." "Thank you for asking me," she replied. "I'm glad I said yes." He kissed her again, a sweet goodnight kiss full of promise. "I'll see you tomorrow in the garden?" Nova nodded. "I'll be there. Give Luca a hug from me." "I will." As Elliot drove back to the resort, he felt lighter than he had in years, as if a weight he'd carried for so long had finally begun to lift. His son was finding his voice, and he, Elliot, was finding his heart again. When Elliot returned to the suite, the babysitter reported that Luca had been perfectly behaved and was now sleeping soundly. After she left, Elliot checked on his son, finding him peaceful under his weighted blanket, the sunflower plant still on his nightstand. "Sweet dreams, buddy," he whispered, kissing Luca's forehead gently. In the living room, Elliot's phone rang. It was Caroline again. "How's our boy?" she asked without preamble. "Amazing," Elliot replied, his voice warm with pride. "He said another word today, Nova. 3 words total now." "That's wonderful," Caroline said, genuine happiness in her voice. "And how was your date?" Elliot laughed softly. "How did you know about that?" "I know you, Elliot Brandt. The way you talked about this woman, I knew you wouldn't wait long to ask her out." "It was good," he admitted. "Really good. She's special, Caroline. Different from anyone I've ever known." "I'm happy for you," she said, and he could hear the sincerity in her voice. "You deserve someone special in your life. Both of you do." They talked for a while longer about Luca's progress, about when Caroline might visit, about the future that suddenly seemed brighter than it had in years. After hanging up, Elliot sat on the balcony gazing at the same stars he'd walked under with Nova earlier. His mind was full of possibilities that had seemed impossible just days ago. Luca speaking, learning, growing beyond the limitations his doctors had warned about, and Nova, with her quiet wisdom and gentle heart, becoming part of their lives in ways he couldn't yet fully imagine but deeply hoped for. For the first time in 3 long years, Elliot allowed himself to dream of a future filled not just with coping and managing, but with joy. Real, uncomplicated joy. And all because of a quiet maid who had seen his son, truly seen him, when no one else could. The next few days unfolded like a beautiful dream for Elliot. Each morning, he and Luca would go to the garden where Nova would be waiting, her smile warm and welcoming. Each day, Luca would speak a little more, never full sentences, just single, precious words: stone, water, sun. And each evening, after Luca was asleep, Elliot would meet Nova for dinner or a quiet walk under the stars. Their connection deepened with every conversation, every shared smile, every gentle kiss goodnight. But their idyllic bubble couldn't last forever. On the 5th day, after Luca's first word, Elliot received a call from his company's board of directors. "Elliot, we need you back in San Francisco," said Martin, the head of the board. "The merger negotiations are stalling, and the investors are getting nervous. They want to hear from you directly." Elliot sighed, looking out at the mountains from his balcony. "I told you I was taking 2 weeks off, Martin. No exceptions." "I know, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical, but this merger could double our market share. It's the deal you've been working toward for 3 years." "My son is more important than any deal," Elliot said firmly. "Of course he is," Martin replied, his voice softening. "And I've heard the wonderful news about him speaking again. That's incredible, Elliot, truly. But we're only asking for 2 days. Fly in tomorrow, handle the meetings, and you can be back at the resort by the weekend." Elliot was torn. The merger was indeed important, not just for him and his investors, but for the millions of people who would benefit from their combined technologies. 2 days seemed reasonable, but 2 days away from Luca, away from Nova, away from the magical space they'd created together, it felt like an eternity. "Let me think about it," he said finally. "I'll call you back this afternoon." After hanging up, Elliot sat heavily on a chair, running a hand through his hair. Just as he was considering what to do, there was a knock at the suite door. It was Nova, not in her work uniform but in jeans and a simple blouse. Her face brightened when she saw him. "Hi," she said. "I hope it's okay that I stopped by. I have the afternoon off and I thought maybe you and Luca might like to go on a picnic." Elliot smiled, his troubles momentarily forgotten at the sight of her. "That sounds perfect." Luca was in the living room, arranging his dinosaurs in complex patterns. When he saw Nova, he looked up, a direct gaze that still surprised Elliot each time it happened. "Nova," he said clearly, the name now familiar on his lips. "Hi, Luca," she replied, kneeling down to his level. "Would you like to go on a picnic today, in a special place in the mountains?" Luca considered this, then said, "Blue." Nova smiled, understanding immediately. "Yes, we can bring the blue plate, and we'll see the blue sky and maybe even blue flowers." The boy nodded once, satisfied. They packed a simple lunch, sandwiches, fruit, cookies that Nova had baked that morning, and drove in Elliot's SUV to a secluded spot Nova knew, a small meadow surrounded by pine trees with a view of the valley below. As they spread the blanket on the grass, Elliot watched Luca exploring the meadow, examining wildflowers and interesting stones with his usual meticulous attention. "He seems so much more present," Elliot observed, "more connected to the world around him." Nova nodded, arranging their picnic lunch on the blanket. "He's always been connected to the world just in his own way, but now he's finding bridges between his world and ours." She called to Luca, who came and sat with them to eat. They had brought his blue plate as promised, and he arranged his food in careful sections before eating, one type at a time. "I need to tell you something," Elliot said to Nova as they watched Luca eat. "My company called this morning. They want me back in San Francisco for a couple of days. Important meetings." Nova's expression remained calm, though he detected a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "When would you leave?" "Tomorrow morning if I go. I'd be back by Friday night." She nodded slowly. "And will you go?" Elliot sighed. "I should. It's a merger I've been working on for years, but..." He looked at Luca, then back at her. The timing couldn't be worse. Nova was quiet for a moment, considering. "What if we came with you?" "What?" Elliot asked, surprised. "Luca and I," she clarified. "What if we came to San Francisco? I've never been there, and it might be easier for Luca to handle the transition if I'm there too." Elliot stared at her, amazed by the suggestion. "You would do that? Just pick up and come with us?" "I have vacation days I've never used," she said with a small smile, "and I'd like to see where you and Luca live, where your life is." Hope bloomed in Elliot's chest. "I would love that. But what about Luca? The change in routine, the travel, it might be too much for him." They both looked at the boy, who was now carefully arranging blueberries in a perfect circle on his plate. "Luca," Nova said gently, "would you like to go on a trip with your dad and me to see your house?" Luca didn't look up from his blueberries, but after a moment, he said clearly, "Nova, come." Elliot's eyes widened. It was the first time Luca had put two words together since he'd started speaking again. "Yes," Nova replied, her voice steady despite the emotion Elliot could see in her eyes. "Nova would come with you." Luca nodded once, continuing with his blueberries. Elliot reached for Nova's hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "For everything." She smiled, squeezing back. "It's just a trip to San Francisco." "It's more than that," he said. "You know it is." The look they shared held volumes, understanding, affection, and the beginnings of something deeper that neither was quite ready to name. After lunch, they explored the meadow together, Nova showing Luca different wildflowers and teaching him their names. To Elliot's amazement, his son repeated several: daisy, lupine, aster. Each word was a gift, a small miracle that Elliot stored away in his heart. As the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, they packed up their picnic and headed back to the resort. Luca fell asleep in the back seat, tired from the day's adventures. "I'll call the airline when we get back," Elliot said quietly. "Book tickets for all of us." Nova nodded, looking out at the passing scenery. "I should go home and pack a few things. I'll drive you after we get Luca settled." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in thoughts about the journey ahead, not just the physical trip to San Francisco, but the emotional journey they had all embarked on together. "Are you nervous?" Elliot asked eventually. "About coming to my world?" Nova considered the question. "A little," she admitted. "Your life there is so different from mine here." "Different but not better," Elliot said firmly. "What you have here, the peace, the connection to nature, the simple joy in small things, that's what's been missing from my life, from Luca's life. And what you have, the resources to help children like Luca, the platform to make real change in the world, that's important too," Nova replied. "Maybe we need both." Elliot glanced at her, struck by the wisdom in her words. "Maybe we do." The next morning was a flurry of activity. Elliot packed for himself and Luca, while coordinating with his assistant in San Francisco about the upcoming meetings. Nova arrived at their suite early, a small suitcase in hand, looking both excited and nervous. "Ready for an adventure?" Elliot asked with a smile. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, kneeling to greet Luca, who was lining up his toy cars on the coffee table. "Good morning, Luca. Are you ready for our trip?" The boy looked up at her, his green eyes serious. "Plane," he said clearly. "That's right," Nova agreed. "We're going on a plane today." Elliot watched their interaction, marveling again at the easy connection between them. Nova had a way of meeting Luca exactly where he was, without expectation or demand, that created a space of trust and safety. They took a resort shuttle to the airport, where Elliot's private jet was waiting. Nova's eyes widened when she saw it. "You didn't mention we'd be flying private," she said, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Is that okay?" Elliot asked, suddenly aware of the vast differences in their lifestyles. Nova took a deep breath, then nodded. "It's just new, but probably better for Luca, right? Less crowded, less overwhelming." "Exactly," Elliot agreed, relieved. Boarding was smooth, with Luca showing only minimal signs of anxiety that quickly faded once they were settled in the comfortable cabin. Nova sat beside him, showing him how to look out the window at the clouds and mountains below. "Birds fly high," Luca said, pointing at the window. "Yes, they do," Nova agreed. "And now we're flying high too, just like the birds." Elliot, seated across from them, felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. A week ago, his son had been locked in silence, and he himself had been locked in a prison of worry and control. Now here they were, Luca speaking, Elliot opening his heart, and this remarkable woman beside them, bridging their worlds with her quiet grace. The flight to San Francisco took less than 2 hours. As they began their descent, Elliot pointed out landmarks to Nova, the Golden Gate Bridge, Alcatraz Island, the distinctive skyline. "It's beautiful," she said, her eyes wide as she took in the city spread below them. "Different from your mountains," Elliot observed. "Different, but beautiful in its own way," she replied with a smile. A car was waiting for them at the airport, a sleek black SUV with a driver Elliot had used for years. "Welcome back, Mr. Brandt," the driver said, opening the door for them. "And welcome to San Francisco, ma'am," he added with a polite nod to Nova. "Thank you," she replied softly, helping Luca into his special car seat. As they drove through the city toward Pacific Heights, Elliot watched Nova taking in the sights, the steep hills, the colorful Victorian houses, the glimpses of the bay between buildings. Her expression was one of wonder and appreciation, without any hint of the intimidation or discomfort he had feared she might feel. "What do you think?" he asked, as they turned onto his street, lined with elegant mansions behind wrought-iron gates. "It's a beautiful city," she said simply. "I can see why you love it." They pulled up in front of Elliot's home, a large stately house with a manicured front garden and imposing stone steps leading to the entrance. As the driver unloaded their luggage, Elliot saw Nova taking it all in, her expression unreadable. "It's too big," he said suddenly, seeing his home through her eyes, "for just Luca and me. I've always known that, but it's your home," Nova said gently, "and it's beautiful." Luca had already started up the steps, eager to be in familiar surroundings after the journey. Elliot and Nova followed, the driver bringing their bags. Inside, the house was elegant but surprisingly warm. Hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, walls lined with books and photos of Luca at various ages. It wasn't the cold, sterile mansion Nova might have expected from a tech billionaire. "Let me show you around," Elliot said, taking her hand. He led her through the main rooms. The living room with its grand piano that no one played, the formal dining room they rarely used, the modern kitchen where their housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, was preparing a welcome home dinner. Mrs. Chen, this is Nova James. Elliot introduced them. She'll be staying with us for a few days. The older woman smiled warmly. Welcome, Miss James. It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you, Nova replied. Your kitchen is beautiful. Would you like some tea? You must be tired from your journey. That would be lovely, Nova said with genuine appreciation. While Mrs. Chen prepared tea, Elliot continued the tour, showing Nova the library, his home office, and finally the garden at the back of the house. It was smaller than she might have expected, but beautifully designed. A walled sanctuary in the heart of the city, with carefully tended flowers, a small fountain, and a stone bench similar to the one in the resort garden. This is Luca's favorite place, Elliot explained as they watched the boy immediately go to the bench and begin examining the plants nearby. When the weather is good, he spends hours out here. I can see why, Nova said, looking around appreciatively. It's peaceful, a little piece of nature in the middle of the city. It's not your mountain garden, Elliot said, a hint of apology in his voice. It's perfect in its own way, Nova assured him. Just like Luca is perfect in his own way. After tea in the garden, Elliot showed Nova to the guest room where she would stay, a comfortable space with a private bathroom and a view of the garden below. Will this be okay? He asked, as she set her small suitcase on the bed. It's lovely, she assured him. Thank you. I need to make some calls before dinner, Elliot said reluctantly. Tomorrow's meetings. Go, Nova encouraged him. I'll stay with Luca in the garden. We'll be fine. Elliot kissed her cheek gratefully before heading to his office. Through the window, he could see Nova and Luca in the garden below, already settled into a comfortable routine. Nova sitting on the bench, Luca arranging stones along the fountain's edge. It felt right, seeing them there, as if Nova belonged in their home, in their lives, in a way no one else ever had. The next morning was hectic. Elliot had to be at his company headquarters by 8 for the first of several crucial meetings. He was torn between his professional responsibilities and his desire to ensure that Nova and Luca were comfortable. We'll be fine, Nova assured him as she helped Luca with his breakfast. Mrs. Chen showed me where everything is, and Luca can show me his favorite places in the neighborhood. Are you sure? Elliot asked, adjusting his tie nervously. The city can be overwhelming if you're not used to it. Nova smiled, straightening his tie with gentle hands. Elliot, I managed to connect with your nonverbal son. I think I can handle a day in San Francisco. Her confidence calmed him. You're right. Of course you're right. He kissed her cheek, then knelt to say goodbye to Luca. Be good for Nova, buddy. I'll be home for dinner. Dad work, Luca said clearly, surprising both adults. Elliot's eyes widened. That's right, Luca. Dad has to go to work today. The boy nodded once, returning to his breakfast. With one last grateful look at Nova, Elliot headed out, his heart lighter despite the challenging day ahead. The meetings were intense, hours of negotiations, presentations, and strategic discussions about the merger. Elliot found himself more focused and decisive than usual, perhaps because he had a new clarity about what really mattered in his life. During a break, he texted Nova, "How are things going?" Her reply came quickly, along with a photo of Luca feeding ducks at a nearby park. Wonderful. Luca is teaching me about San Francisco birds. The image of his son, smiling, engaged, sharing his world with Nova, gave Elliot the strength to power through the rest of his meetings with renewed energy. By 6 o'clock, the deal was done. The merger had been approved, contracts signed, handshakes exchanged. It was a professional triumph that would transform his company and help millions of people with disabilities access technology more easily. Yet as Elliot rode home in his car, it wasn't the business success that filled his heart with joy. It was the knowledge that Nova and Luca were waiting for him, that he was coming home not just to a house but to people he loved. The realization stopped him short. Love. Yes, that was what he felt for Nova. A deep, steady love that had grown so naturally he'd barely noticed it happening, and it had only been a week since they'd met. When he arrived home, the house was filled with the aroma of a home-cooked meal. He followed the sounds of soft laughter to the kitchen, where he found Nova and Luca making cookies with Mrs. Chen. "Dad home," Luca announced, looking up from the cookie dough he was carefully shaping. "That's right, buddy. I'm home." Elliot set down his briefcase and joined them at the counter. "What are you making?" "Dinosaur cookies," Nova explained with a smile. "Luca is the designer." Sure enough, the boy was meticulously shaping the dough into recognizable dinosaur forms, his focus intense but his expression relaxed and happy. "How was your day?" Elliot asked, washing his hands to join the baking project. Wonderful, Nova replied. We explored the park, visited the children's library and had lunch at a cafe where they knew Luca by name. The Blue Kettle, Elliot nodded. It's his favorite place. The owner's son is on the spectrum too, so they're very accommodating. After dinner, while Mrs. Chen cleaned up and Luca played in the living room, Elliot and Nova stepped out onto the back patio with glasses of wine. How did your meetings go? Nova asked, sitting beside him on a cushioned bench. Better than I expected, Elliot replied. The merger is happening. It's a good deal for everyone involved. I'm happy for you, she said sincerely. Your work is important. Thank you. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. But the whole time I was there, I was thinking about you and Luca, about coming home to you both. Nova's eyes softened in the fading light. It was nice, spending the day with him, seeing his world, his routines. He's so much more adaptable than I think people give him credit for. Than I give him credit for, Elliot acknowledged. I've been so focused on protecting him, on controlling his environment, that I never gave him the chance to show me how capable he really is. You were doing your best, Nova said gently. Being a single parent to a child with special needs, it's an enormous challenge. It's easier with you, Elliot said, his voice low and serious. Everything is easier with you, Nova. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. These past few days have been like a beautiful dream, she said softly. But eventually, I have to go back to my life, and you to yours. What if they could be the same life? The words escaped before Elliot could consider them, but once spoken he knew they were true. What if you stayed? Not just for this visit, but longer. Nova's eyes widened. Elliot, we've known each other for a week. I know, he acknowledged. And under normal circumstances, I'd say that's not enough time. But nothing about this has been normal, Nova. The way you connected with Luca, the way he's blossoming with you in his life, it feels like you were meant to be part of our family. Family, she repeated, the word heavy with meaning. Yes, family, Elliot said firmly. I'm not proposing marriage. Not yet, anyway, he added with a small smile. But I am asking you to consider staying, to see where this could go, for all of us. Nova was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. What would I do here? I'm a maid, Elliot, a gardener. You live in a world of tech CEOs and million-dollar deals. You're so much more than your job, Elliot said, squeezing her hand. You have a gift with children like Luca. You were studying psychology before. You could finish your degree, work with special needs children if that's what you want. Or you could tend our garden and read books all day. I don't care as long as you're happy. And Luca, what if he stops progressing? What if the magic of these past days fades? Then we'll still be better for having had you in our lives, Elliot said simply. I'm not asking you to be his miracle worker, Nova. I'm asking you to be part of our family because we care about you. Because He paused, then decided to be completely honest. Because I'm falling in love with you. Nova's eyes filled with tears. Elliot. Before she could continue, they heard a small sound from the doorway. Luca stood there watching them with his serious green eyes. Luca, Nova said, quickly wiping her tears. Is everything okay? The boy approached them slowly, something clutched in his hand. When he reached Nova, he held it out to her, the small blue stone she had given him in the resort garden. Nova, stay, he said clearly, placing the stone in her palm and closing her fingers around it. Tears spilled down Nova's cheeks as she looked from the stone to Luca's face. Oh, Luca, she whispered. Elliot's own eyes burned with emotion. I think that's a vote in my favor, he said softly. Nova looked from Luca to Elliot, her expression a complex mixture of hope and uncertainty. I need to think, she said finally. This is a big decision. Of course, Elliot agreed. Take all the time you need. But as they went inside to get Luca ready for bed, he could feel that something had shifted. The seed of possibility had been planted, and he had hope, real, solid hope, that it would grow into something beautiful. The next morning, Elliot had another early meeting, but it was shorter than the previous day's marathon sessions. By noon, he was free to return home, eager to spend the afternoon with Nova and Luca. When he arrived, the house was quiet. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen preparing lunch. Where are Nova and Luca? Elliot asked, setting down his briefcase. In the garden, Mrs. Chen replied with a knowing smile. They've been out there all morning. The boy is talking more than I've ever heard him. Elliot went to the back door and looked out. Nova and Luca were sitting on the garden bench, looking at a book together. As he watched, Luca pointed to something on the page and said a word Elliot couldn't hear. Nova nodded, pointing to a nearby flower that matched the picture. It was such a simple scene, a woman and a child reading together in a garden, but to Elliot it was more beautiful than any painting in the finest museum. He stepped outside, and they both looked up. "Dad, home early," Luca said, his face lighting up with a small but definite smile. "That's right, buddy. The meeting's finished early, so I came home to be with you and Nova." Nova's eyes met his, warm and full of something that made his heart race. "We're glad you're home," she said softly. They had a picnic lunch in the garden, spread on a blanket just as they had done in the mountain meadow. Luca was more talkative than Elliot had ever seen him, naming flowers, colors, shapes, not in full sentences yet, but in clear, confident words. After lunch, when Luca was absorbed in arranging pine cones along the garden path, Elliot turned to Nova. "You seem different today," he observed. "More settled." She nodded, her expression serene. "I made a decision last night." Elliot's heart skipped a beat. "About staying?" "About many things." She took a deep breath. "I called my parents this morning. They're the ones who've been encouraging me to go back to school, to use my experience with Michael to help other children." "What did they say?" "They said it was about time," Nova replied with a small laugh. "They've been waiting for me to find my way back to that path, and they were very interested to hear about you and Luca." Hope bloomed in Elliot's chest. "Does that mean—" "It means I need to go back to the mountains first," Nova said gently, "to pack up my cottage, to say proper goodbyes. But then yes, I'd like to try staying here, with you and Luca." Elliot's face broke into a radiant smile. "Really? You'll stay?" "I'll try," she clarified. "I can't promise it will work, that I'll fit into your world, or that what's happening with Luca will continue. But I want to find out. I want to be brave enough to try." "That's all I'm asking for," Elliot said, taking her hands in his. "A chance for us to find out together." Nova's eyes were bright with emotion. "There's something else. I spoke with the director at Camp Sunflower this morning. They've been looking for a new program coordinator for their year-round services. Someone who can work with autistic children and their families, develop activities, train staff." "That sounds perfect for you," Elliot said, squeezing her hands. "It would mean living here but traveling to the mountains sometimes for work," Nova explained. "The best of both worlds in a way." "Whatever makes you happy," Elliot assured her. "Whatever you need to feel fulfilled, we'll make it work." Nova looked over at Luca, who was now carefully placing a yellow flower at the end of his line of pine cones. "I think what I need is right here," she said softly. "A chance to love and be loved, to make a difference, to belong." Elliot's heart felt too full for words. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed her gently, pouring all his gratitude and hope and love into that one tender gesture. When they parted, Nova's eyes were shining. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "With both of you." A small sound made them turn. Luca was standing beside them, watching with his serious green eyes. "Nova stay?" he asked, his voice clear and questioning. Nova smiled, holding out her hand to him. "Yes, Luca. Nova will stay." The boy nodded once, satisfied, then took her offered hand, a voluntary touch that still felt like a miracle. "Family," he said, looking from Nova to his father. It was just one word, his 7th since that first flower in the garden, but it contained universes of meaning, of hope, of possibility. "Yes, buddy," Elliot said, his voice rough with emotion as he placed his hand over theirs. Family. 1 week later, the mountain garden was peaceful in the late afternoon light. Nova knelt among the yellow daisies, saying her goodbyes to the place that had healed her after Michael's death. "I think you would approve," she said softly, as if her brother could hear her. "I think you would like Luca and Elliot." She felt, rather than heard, someone approaching behind her. Turning, she saw Elliot walking toward her, Luca's hand firmly in his. "Sorry to interrupt," Elliot said. "Luca wanted to see the garden one more time before we leave." Nova smiled, standing up and brushing dirt from her jeans. "I was just finishing up." The past week had been a whirlwind of activity. Nova had given notice at the resort, packed up her small cottage, and made arrangements to start her new position at Camp Sunflower the following month. Elliot had extended their stay at the resort so they could handle everything together before returning to San Francisco. Luca let go of his father's hand and walked to the stone bench where it had all begun. He sat down and began arranging fallen petals in a line, just as he had done that first day. "It's hard to believe it's only been 2 weeks," Elliot said, standing beside Nova as they watched his son. "It feels like I've known you forever." Sometimes the most important connections in life happen in an instant, Nova replied, slipping her hand into his. Michael used to say that time moves differently for people like him, that some moments stretch out forever, while others flash by too quickly to grasp. He sounds like he was very wise, Elliot said. He was, and I think Luca has that same wisdom. Nova watched as the boy carefully placed a yellow daisy at the end of his line of petals. They see the world differently than we do. Sometimes I think they see it more clearly. Elliot nodded, understanding. Before I met you, I was always trying to pull Luca into my world. Now I realize I need to step into his sometimes, to see things through his eyes. The best relationships work that way, Nova said softly. Each person stepping into the other's world, creating something new together. Luca stood up from the bench and walked toward them, something clasped in his small hand. When he reached them, he held it out to Nova, a perfect yellow daisy, just like the one she had placed on the yellow towel that first day. Flower, he said clearly, his green eyes meeting hers directly. For Nova. Nova knelt down, accepting the precious gift. Thank you, Luca, it's beautiful. The boy reached out and touched her cheek gently, a spontaneous gesture of affection that brought tears to her eyes. Family, he said again, the word becoming a favorite in his growing vocabulary. Yes, Nova whispered, her heart full. We're a family now. She looked up at Elliot, who was watching them with eyes bright with emotion. In his face, she saw everything she had ever wanted, but had been afraid to hope for. Love, acceptance, belonging, a second chance at family. Ready to go home? Elliot asked, holding out his hand to help her up. Nova took his hand and rose to her feet, the daisy still clutched gently in her other hand. She looked around the garden one last time, at the flowers she had tended, the paths she had swept, the bench where a silent boy had first begun to find his voice. Yes, she said, her voice firm and clear. I'm ready. As they walked together toward the resort, Luca between them holding both their hands, Nova felt Michael's presence one last time, not as a ghost of grief, but as a blessing, a gentle approval of the new life she was choosing. She looked up at the mountains rising around them, their peaks touched with golden sunset light, then at Elliot and Luca beside her, her new family, her future. The garden had done its work. It had healed her heart after loss. It had brought her to these two remarkable souls who needed exactly what she had to give. And now it was time to move forward, to grow something new together. Nova, Luca said, tugging at her hand. She looked down at him, smiling. Yes, Luca. He pointed to the sky where the first star of evening was just becoming visible. Pretty, he said. Yes, Nova agreed, her heart full of gratitude for this moment, this child, this man, this life unfolding before her. Very pretty. Elliot's eyes met hers over Luca's head, filled with the same wonder and joy she felt. Without words, they shared the miracle of this moment, of a boy finding his voice, of two lonely hearts finding each other, of a family being born from silence and patience and love. It had all begun with a single word in a garden, and now, with each new word Luca spoke, their story would continue to unfold, one precious word at a time. Home, Luca said, looking ahead toward the waiting car that would take them to the airport, to San Francisco, to their future together. That's right, buddy, Elliot said, squeezing Nova's hand. We're going home. Home, the most beautiful word of all. The end.